The Walking Dead is one of the most iconic series in television history, and when a show runs for over a decade and amasses a cult-like following, you are bound to get some fan theories. And in today's video, I thought we'd delve into as many of these fan theories as I could possibly find. Now, I've spent hours scouring the internet from Reddit threads all the way to backdated articles, creating an iceberg of pretty much every theory I came across. So, there are three layers to this iceberg, the well-known theories being situated in layer 1, the more obscure ones being positioned in layer 2, and the most insane and niche theories all located in layer 3. Now, before I start, a quick disclaimer, this video contains spoilers for The Walking Dead and some other spin-off shows, and I am not the creator of any of these theories, I am just simply relaying them to you guys. So, without further ado, let's delve into the world of The Walking Dead fan theories and get straight into layer 1 of the iceberg. The first theory of today's video existed amongst the fanbase from around 2012 to 2017, but really started to pick up momentum throughout seasons 6 and 7 of the show after several YouTube videos covered the theory. So, what is the theory? Well, this theory states that the entire series is a story being told by an elderly Carl Grimes, who is recalling his days as a child in the early years of the zombie apocalypse to his now children, which would of course be Rick Grimes' grandchildren in this hypothetical scenario. Using a similar format to the Smash TV series How I Met Your Mother in terms of past tense storytelling by a main character, and applying this to The Walking Dead, it made for a popular fan theory that garnered quite a lot of respect in the early days of the show. However, on February 25th, 2018, in Season 8, Episode 9 titled Honor, it was revealed that Carl Grimes had been bitten by a walker, and in the very same episode he subsequently takes his own life, which not only changed the course of the show forever and shattered a huge portion of the fanbase's hearts, but also disproved this theory. Now, some diehard fans of this concept adjusted the theory to now include Judith Grimes instead of Carl, suggesting it was actually her retelling the story rather than him. But the truth is, after Carl's death, most people just forgot about this theory and left it in the past. Now, I'm sure we all know the story of The Walking Dead. Humankind is ravaged by a highly contagious virus that turns people into flesh-eating monsters named walkers. But another theory from the early seasons of the show suggested that walkers would eventually rot away, limbs would fall off, and they would just essentially cease to exist, decaying into nothing more than lifeless skeletons. Now, the idea of walkers dying out has always fascinated me personally because they are fundamentally dead bodies and are therefore subjected to the process of decomposition. And whilst yes, the writers have kind of shown us this through the years, with walkers almost merged into their environments, sleeper variants, and ones that are barely functional, these instances seem to be exceptions. They are found few and far between, despite the fact that we are well over a decade into the apocalypse in the current timeline. Most walkers we see on screen are fully functional and look aesthetically the same to the ones we saw years ago, with no signs of walkers as a general population having problems with decomposition or declining numbers. So yes, whilst the idea of walkers slowly dying out after Monument Day was an interesting theory early on in the show's life cycle, I think it's pretty much been proven wrong at this point. I mean, Daryl Dixon Season 3 is currently airing as we speak, and the walkers in that show look no different to the ones we saw a good 8 years ago from the main show, for example. But look, I used to love this theory back in the day, and whilst it would have been a good way for the show to naturally shift its focus away from the zombies and over to the characters, ultimately, The Walking Dead is a zombie show. So killing off all the zombies would essentially just turn it into a character drama. So in hindsight, although this theory is fairly believable using real life science such as composition, I'm glad this theory never came true. Now, Heath's disappearance is one of the most famous unanswered questions in the entire Walking Dead. As in Season 7, Episode 6, we see Tara and Heath go scavenging for weapons, only for a horde of walkers to ambush them on a bridge. And Heath, well, he disappears, with the only things being left behind being Heath's broken glasses and a card reading PPP. Now, for years, fans speculated what had actually happened to the character, but in an interview in 2019, some 3 years after Heath's disappearance, the then showrunner Angela Kang confirmed to us that Heath was alive and had been taken by the Civic Republic, stating that Jadis, the leader of the trash people, had traded Heath to the settlement in exchange for supplies. And naturally, after we got this information, the theories continued to spiral out of control. Many thought he would appear in the scrapped Walking Dead movies, and then after that The Ones Who Live, or maybe even Daryl Dixon, but to this day there has been no sight or mention within the series of Heath. Theories circulated around Reddit of him being tested on inside the Civic Republic whilst they tried to find a cure. Some speculated he'd become a key military figure within the CRM, whilst others just assumed he would make a cameo in at least one of the many Walking Dead spin-offs. And although in Tales of the Walking Dead we do see the same PPP card pop up, as of now and probably forever, little is known about Heath's current whereabouts or fate, so many of these theories are still doing the rounds on Reddit to this day. Right, I'm not sure what it is with Walking Dead fans, but apparently we like to accuse every single character of being a spy at some point, as you'll see with some of the other entries further down on the iceberg. But this theory suggested, long before Dante was actually revealed to be the Whisperer spy, that it was actually Siddiq playing the role of double agent. In the episode The Calm Before, Alpha, Beta and the Whisperers decapitate multiple Alexandrians, including Tara and Henry. However, they leave behind one person, that one person of course being Siddiq. And it's explained to us in the show that Siddiq's left alive by the Whisperers in order to spread the message of the horrors that occurred that day. Now, after this incident, Siddiq starts to suffer with an extreme case of PTSD, which is pretty understandable if you ask me. But fans started to speculate that Siddiq was forced into a pact due to fear into helping the Whisperers. And the theory states that Alpha forces Siddiq to participate in the decapitations himself in exchange for his life. Now, there's a scene later on in season 10 where Siddiq is operating on Carol, and when he tries to pick up a scalpel, he suddenly gets a vision of a bloody blade and the words of Alpha saying, quote, "good," ringing around in his head. And theorists took this as confirmation that Siddiq participated in the decapitations, which I personally think is a bit of a reach. And on top of this, the theory explains that during the Whisperer War, our group crossed into Whisperer territory 3 times, with only one of those 3 times being physically seen by the Whisperers themselves, meaning the other 2 times, someone from Alexandria would have had to inform them. And people thought that someone was Siddiq. Now, these theories were right, but they just accused the wrong person, with the real spy of course being Dante. Now, I personally always thought this theory was a stretch, as Siddiq betraying the community he'd been a part of for years just didn't fit his character arc, and it would also mean Carl sacrificed himself for a person who betrays our group, which goes against the very message that he was trying to portray, so I just didn't think the writers would do this. However, this theory does correctly manage to predict the fact there was a Whisperer spy inside Alexandria, which I think is pretty impressive. When Eugene Porter was introduced to us in season 4 of the show, he brought along with him the supposed concept of a cure to the wildfire virus. However, at this time, many fans, especially comic book readers, could see straight through his lies and assumed that this was not true. So the theory started off being correct, with them correctly calling out Eugene's lies long before the reveal in season 5 episode 5 titled Self-Help. However, some fans just couldn't let go and created the theory that Eugene did in fact know the cure, or at least had the scientific framework for one, but that he was happy with the group he'd found in the apocalypse and wanted them to all be together, as well as preferring his life in the apocalypse to the one he had before, so he chose not to carry on to DC and to pretend he was lying. The theory also claims that Eugene didn't want to dedicate his life to solving the cure and thought that a cure could be weaponized or used as leverage for horrific acts. And finally, some people thought Eugene saying "I have a cure" was his ticket to survival early on, but saying "I in fact don't have a cure and I lied about it" was his second ticket, because once people lost faith in the idea, nobody would hunt him down to try and exploit him, leaving him to live a relatively peaceful life in the apocalypse. So essentially, throughout the 11 seasons of The Walking Dead, Eugene's known about a cure the whole time, but has chosen not to say a word. But I mean, come on, this theory is mental in my opinion, and I personally can't see much logic in it at all, along with the fact that there is literally zero evidence. Travis Manawa was one of the main characters in the popular Walking Dead spin-off Fear the Walking Dead, and played a huge role in the first 2 seasons of the show. However, in the season 3 premiere titled The New Frontier, Travis is unexpectedly killed off, getting shot in the neck and then falling from a helicopter, mainly due to the fact his actor Cliff Curtis had signed on to be a part of the upcoming Avatar trilogy, so he'd requested to be killed off the show. Now, in Fear the Walking Dead, there is little closure surrounding his character's death, and for such a pivotal character within the story, everyone else seems to move past it extremely quickly. This is when a large portion of Fear fans devised a theory that Travis Manawa would make a return at some point in the show, much like the characters of Daniel Salazar, who escaped the brink of death not once but twice within the show, firstly escaping being trapped inside a burning building and then being shot in the mouth, and the characters of Madison and Troy Otto, who were both resurrected in later seasons. It seemed no matter how dead a character seemed to be within Fear the Walking Dead, there was always a possibility they could return, mainly due to poor writing in the later seasons. But anyway, moving on. Now, although we never did get the anticipated Travis Manawa return in Fear the Walking Dead, as Season 8 would conclude and there was still no sign of him, the anticipated release of The Ones Who Live is where Fear the Walking Dead fans really started to speculate. There was a now known to be photoshopped image of Travis's actor Cliff Curtis in CRM military gear, supposedly on set of The Ones Who Live, and a theory circulated that Travis fell into a lake after falling from the helicopter, meaning he survived the initial fall, and he was seen and rescued by a community who patched him up, and he somehow joined the CRM, becoming friends with none other than Rick Grimes. And that in The Ones Who Live, we would see Travis Manawa on our screens again for the first time in over 7 years. But of course, this would turn out to never happen, and although the Wild Travis theories have died out, there is still a large portion of the fanbase who still think he's alive somewhere in the world of The Walking Dead. Now, some fans are adamant that Travis was bitten by a walker before falling out of the helicopter, but in the show notes and the Walking Dead wiki page, there is no mention of a bite, so his injuries were a shot to the neck and one to the stomach, meaning he definitely didn't get infected. So whilst there is the smallest possibility he's alive, again, I'm sorry, this theory is a huge reach, but then again, Troy was hit on the head numerous times with a hammer and then blown up and still somehow survived, so who even knows at this point? Now, this next theory is again one of the most famous amongst the Walking Dead fanbase, and that is the theory that all children born after Monument Day, aka the fall of civilization, are totally immune to the wildfire virus. And this theory would hold up for years, as throughout the 11 seasons of The Walking Dead, we do not see one child born after Monument Day die or reanimate. However, in Season 8 of Fear the Walking Dead, this theory would finally be disproven, as the character of Finch, aka Dwight and Sherry's son, would be infected by a walker bite and eventually succumb to the illness. But again, that doesn't totally disprove this theory, because yes, whilst children born after Monument Day may not be totally immune to the virus, they might be free of the virus, at least from birth, until it's transmitted to them via a bite or a scratch. For example, a child born in the apocalypse may be wildfire free, meaning after death they wouldn't reanimate into a walker. And this theory incorporates some real life science as well, as occasionally babies whose mothers are infected with a certain virus create antibodies to combat that virus, and when the child is born, these babies come out essentially immune to whatever virus the mother had at the time. But again, this is just a theory, as throughout the main show or any spin-offs, we are yet to see a child born post-Monument Day die of anything other than a walker bite. So this one is largely still up in the air. Now, this next theory is one of my absolute favourites, and it states that because throughout Carl Grimes' childhood his mother Laurie was always the one to cut his hair, after her death in Season 3 of the show, Carl flat out refuses to get a haircut until his death in Season 8. Now, not only is this theory insanely wholesome and tragic all at the same time, but also most likely true. Now, it was revealed that Chandler Riggs, the actor who plays Carl, was asked to grow out his hair long during the production of season 6 by Scott Gimple, because his long hair would help to cover up the bandages and make the CGI easier for when his character lost his right eye in the episode No Way Out. But in my opinion, this is a subtle fan theory that's probably true, because regardless of Scott Gimple asking Chandler Riggs to grow out his hair for season 6, that still leaves us with 3 seasons where Carl refused to get his hair cut. And I personally like to imagine that Carl chose to never get his hair cut in order to honour his late mother Laurie. So this is a subtle and small fan theory, but one of my favourites. Ever since the Whisperer's debut appearance in issue 130 of the Walking Dead comics in August 2014, fans of the show have been cooking up theories to do with the antagonist group. Now, there are 2 very famous ones which I will cover in this video. Firstly, the one in season 2. Arguably one of the most famous scenes in the entire series appears in the episode 18 Miles Out, and it depicts a lone walker wandering aimlessly through a field as the increasingly more isolated Shane looks on from the car window. Now, this scene is most likely meant to symbolise Shane's role within our group. The walker is alone and aimlessly wandering, much like Shane, who is now emotionally and ideologically isolated from our group. Yes, he's still physically with them at the farm, but mentally, he's totally separated from their values and their sense of community. But what if what Shane saw in the field that day wasn't a walker at all, but was in fact an early version of Beta from seasons 9 and 10, before he'd even joined the Whisperers? Now stick with me here, as this theory is one that still does the rounds to this very day. And it states that the lone walker, like previously mentioned, is in fact an early version of Beta, but this, in my humble opinion, is outright insanity. Firstly, Beta is from Maryland, meaning this trip would be a 700-mile journey. It's also stated that Beta took refuge in a survivor camp for the early days of the outbreak, and then ended up in an abandoned hospital. So the timelines also just don't really match up here at all. Shane saw the lone walker between day 83 and day 86 of the apocalypse, so for this to even have any chance of being true, Beta would have had to have left his camp, put on a suit, which I can't imagine is the most practical choice of clothing in the apocalypse, and take a 2-week walk down to Atlanta. Like, why? But then there's the more believable and famous theory of the Whisperers appearing in season 3 of the show. Now, this theory claims that both Morgan Jones and Lizzie came across the group long before their introduction in season 9. Firstly, in the episode Clear, it's revealed Morgan's son Dwayne was killed, causing Morgan to spiral out of control, going insane. But when him and Rick are going back and forth, he says something very interesting to Rick.
People wearing dead people's faces! Morgan, listen. No, I don't know you!
Yes, that's right, there were people wearing dead people's faces. Now, many just toss this up to Morgan being outright insane, but this theory suggests that maybe Morgan wasn't insane after all, and he had just happened to come across an early version of the Whisperers. This theory also suggests that Lizzie also encountered the group, which is why she thinks walkers are actually people. Now, in the show, we watch Lizzie become totally infatuated by the walkers, so much so that she murders her own sister Mika in order to, well, in her own eyes, save her. But this theory suggests Lizzie saw the Whisperers communicate whilst disguised as walkers, and it twisted her sense of reality. It poses that while she was out in the wilderness before joining our group at the prison, she encountered the Whisperers whilst they were still a passive group led by a woman named Hera. She watched the group move unscathed, whispering to one another whilst hiding, and that's how she developed her twisted theory that the walkers were actually real people. Now, this theory used a lot of evidence in the show and was so well thought out that Robert Kirkman himself had to come out and disprove the theory, saying the Whisperers weren't even a concept at the time seasons 2 and 3 of the show released. But for a theory to make so much sense that the creator of the comics had to come out and disprove it shows how well thought out and coincidental some of the moments in the earlier seasons were. So this will forever go down as one of the most legendary fan theories, probably of all time. Now, this next theory is not only self-explanatory, but also one of the laziest, in my humble opinion, and that is the theory that Rick Grimes imagined the whole thing. Every event that unfolds across the 11 seasons of the show is all one big dream from Rick as he lays in his coma in the Harrison Memorial Hospital. Now, I swear every show or film has this exact theory in some way, shape or form. Like when I was a child and I heard the whole Ash Ketchum was in a coma theory imagining all the events of Pokemon, my 10-year-old brain was blown away.
Explosion.
But as you get older, you just realise it's incredibly lazy writing, and I'm sure there would be an uproar from Walking Dead fans if the writers actually did this. Like, imagine Rick just woke up in season 11 and was like, oh, wow, well, that was a strange dream. I mean, it just wouldn't happen. And I mean, the evidence doesn't even really support this either, as Rick Grimes leaves the show in season 9. But yeah, this is the theory that Rick Grimes dreamt the entire events of the show. Now, the fan theory of Rick having someone he's related to pop up in the show has been around since 2015. When AMC released the spin-off show Fear the Walking Dead, fans speculated that lead character Madison Clark was going to be somehow related to Rick Grimes. Whether it be a cousin or some even thought it might be Rick's sister, people were adamant on this happening, and at the time this was a pretty big fan theory. I mean, I heard it on podcasts and I saw threads of it on Reddit that theorized the shows would eventually merge and Madison and Rick would be revealed to be related in some way, shape or form. But obviously time would go past and eventually this theory would be disproven. However, it's not the only time there's been speculation surrounding a Grimes family member. Perhaps an even more intriguing one is the thought of Jeffrey Grimes, a character from the Walking Dead comics appearing in Daryl Dixon. Now, I've covered this in my Walking Dead Iceberg video, but essentially Jeffrey Grimes is Rick's brother in the comics. He appears in a single issue titled The Alien, and it's revealed he travelled to Barcelona, Spain, and couldn't return back to America due to the travel restrictions caused by the outbreak. Interestingly, Rick never mentions having a brother in the show, but he does suggest he has a sister in season 2. But either way, it's never been properly addressed in the series, so it's kind of up to fans' imaginations. But as many of you know, the spin-off show Daryl Dixon is now venturing into Spain, and many think we might either see Jeffrey Grimes or a hypothetical Rick's sister. Now, this would be fascinating to see and a great way to incorporate some lore from the comics over to the TV universe. And this theory not only incorporates facts from the comic book universe, but it's also a huge coincidence that Daryl's even visiting Spain in the first place. Look, we probably won't see Rick's brother in the TV universe in my opinion, but this is a great fan theory. It's imaginative, it uses facts, and it would be awesome to see on our screens. So I am a big fan of the Jeffrey Grimes theory, but with this theory being wrapped up, that completes layer 1 of our iceberg. So let's move on down to layer 2 and investigate some more niche theories within the fandom. Now, kicking off layer 2, we have one of the most subtle theories on the list, and this theory refers to the now infamous dream sequence in the episode The Day Will Come Where You Won't Be. In this dream sequence, we see Morgan Jones seemingly put out 2 candles displayed on the table, whilst the others smile and eat. And this theory suggests that the 2 candles that Morgan puts out represented the lives of Glenn and Abraham, and him extinguishing the flames was a subtle hint to the brutal character deaths the 2 beloved characters received. Now, an extended cut of the dream sequence can be found on YouTube if you do want to go and check it out yourself, but I think this theory could actually be correct. It's an overly joyous scene, meant to depict a happy ending for all of our characters, but the only one not smiling or talking to anyone is Morgan. He then, for seemingly no good reason, randomly puts 2 of the 6 candles laid out on the table out. So at the very least, it's a very strange coincidence. Now, this theory suggests that TV show Rick Grimes is immune to the wildfire virus. This specific theory has been circling around the fanbase, ever since 2010. but it especially picked up steam around 2023 when the YouTube channel Clash PR would cover it, garnering hundreds of thousands of views. And it was only further fueled by the announcement of The Ones Who Live, as many people started to speculate that the reason Rick hadn't returned home is because he was being held by the CRM due to his immunity to the virus. However, we do know now that Rick's immunity wasn't addressed in this miniseries, so we can at least count that bit out. But how does this theory actually work? There's essentially two branches to it. Firstly, the more simple one is after Rick shot and put into a coma at the Harrison Memorial Hospital, fans speculated that due to him being hooked up to IVs and machines, that would essentially keep him alive, and due to his reliance on this very machinery, it meant he didn't breathe in any of the wildfire virus through the air, which in turn would essentially make him immune, or at the very least, not affected by the virus. And then there's a slightly crazier version, which suggests after Shane rushes into the hospital to save Rick and the power goes out, he puts his head to Rick's chest, and he doesn't hear a heartbeat. And Shane, by the way, is a trained sheriff, so he would be qualified in first aid. So him not hearing a heartbeat is pretty telling to us. In this moment, Shane renders Rick essentially dead. So if his heartbeat stopped, how did Rick ever wake up from his coma in the first place? Well, it's theorised because the virus lays dormant within everybody, instead of reanimating Rick and turning him into a walker, the dormant virus actually brought him back to life by reigniting his brain, and Rick was somehow able to escape this zombified version and come back as a fully functional human. And this theory basically renders Rick as an actual walker. Meaning if Rick was to be bit, it wouldn't do anything. People also argue this is how Rick was able to survive many of his injuries throughout the various seasons of The Walking Dead, such as getting impaled by a metal pole in season 9. And this theory has stood the test of time, surviving for over a decade, becoming one of the most famous in the entire fanbase. On December 1st, 2013, one of the most soul-shattering episodes of The Walking Dead would air. In the 50-minute runtime, we would watch not only the prison, a place our survivors called home, torn down, but also the death of the beloved Herschel Green. After this, our group would be split up and make their way to Terminus. Now, I think the majority of us knew that the signs and the promises of a safe sanctuary at Terminus would turn out to be lies. However, ultimately, we had no idea what to expect, and for the first time in the show's history, neither did the comic book fans. So in case you didn't know, the comics were a lot further into the story than the show was, and so far, Atlanta, Herschel's farm, and the prison were all locations that featured in the comics, but Terminus was new. See, it didn't appear in the source material at all, so even the most diehard fans had no idea what to expect. Now, I remember listening to podcasts and seeing posts on Facebook about the lead up to Terminus and it possibly being ran by Negan. I mean, a large portion of the fanbase thought that we would actually meet the Saviours in season 5 of the show. I mean, we even saw a baseball bat covered in barbed wire resembling Lucille in season 4, so it had people convinced that it was coming. To add to this, some fans went one step further, assuming that the crazy man that Rick and the others freed from Terminus was Negan himself, and theories circulated that maybe Negan wouldn't actually be brought to our TV screens and he was just an Easter egg to be killed off in season 5. With another theory suggesting a flashback of Terminus teased Negan, suggesting that Terminus might have actually been a community under Negan's watch, as well as saying that this character on screen now resembled comic book Negan, which in fairness to the theory I do kind of see. But ultimately, of course, Negan didn't appear in season 5 at all, and he most certainly did not die, as the showrunners quickly confirmed that the crazed man killed in the episode No Sanctuary was definitely not Negan. And of course, Negan would go on to be teased throughout season 6 of the show before making his appearance in the episode The Last Day on Earth, in one of the most memorable villain introductions in history. Throughout the 11 seasons of The Walking Dead, fans always speculated that at some point in the story we'd see some kind of walker evolution. And although the organised hordes of seemingly communicating walkers turned out to just be people in masks, we did see in season 11 of the show variant walkers, a form of walker that was capable of not just climbing but leading a horde. And of course, in the various other spin-offs we've seen numerous other variants of walker, whether that's the Rat King from Dead City or the Alpha Walkers injected with super serum that we saw in the Daryl Dixon show. But throughout the main show's runtime, fans created theories around the zombies themselves. Some thought they would evolve to communicate or to use objects such as rocks like we saw with Frank Darabont's walkers in season 1, and others thought the show would in later seasons once again lean on the horror factor of these monsters to drive forward the narrative, having communities such as the CRM run experiments causing certain walkers to become insanely dangerous. Now, my good friend Ty, who you will also hear from later on in the video, has an amazing breakdown on all walker variants seen throughout all spin-offs. So if you did want to learn more about variant walkers, then you should definitely check that video out. But in regards to natural walker evolution, there was very little utilised in the show. Despite fan theories speculating that the creatures would evolve for years, climbing walkers was about as much evolution as we saw. Now, the orange backpack theory is unique in the sense it's not about a character specifically, but about an item within the show. This theory is that every character that would be shown to wear the orange backpack on screen would end up dying somehow. So let's go over the history of the backpack itself first. This item was introduced in the show in Season 3, Episode 12, where we see an unfortunate hitchhiker attempt to flag down Rick, Michonne and Carl, only to be completely ignored. Later on, the trio would be driving back to the prison and see the devoured remains of the man that tried so desperately to flag them down. And on the ground, well, would be his orange backpack that the group would pull over, put into the back, and continue on their journey. And this backpack would end up being worn by several important characters, particularly Glenn and then eventually Carl, causing fans to think that this orange backpack was the writers alluding to a character's death, essentially suggesting that any character that would wear this cursed item would wind up meeting their demise somehow. Now you can imagine the fan uproar when this backpack found its way into the hands of Daryl Dixon. People started the "if Daryl dies we riot" movement, but luckily for them, Daryl would not meet this same grisly demise, and neither would Virgil, the last person seen with this backpack in Season 10, and it hasn't been seen in the universe since that day. This theory was especially big in 2017, around the time of the shocking death of Carl Grimes, and it did seem like a huge coincidence that the owner of this backpack would end up dying over and over again. And although Daryl, like mentioned, would finally break the cycle, I think this is an incredibly well thought out fan theory, and I mean the fact someone even noticed this orange backpack that kept popping up every now and then takes some serious commitment and a keen eye. I mean, this theory actually turned out to be true for a period of time as well, and it became so well known amongst the fanbase that the writers probably deliberately gave Daryl Dixon the orange backpack just to scare fans. So not only is this one of the most well thought out fan theories amongst The Walking Dead, but also I am certain that the writers gave the backpack to Daryl just to scare us all, which makes this one even better. This next theory is rather unconventional, but incredibly well thought out, and that is the theory that The Walking Dead mirrors the events of human history. It states that Season 3 of the show represents the Roman Empire, complete with gladiator games like when the governor makes Daryl and Merle fight, and an insanely cruel and ruthless leader, just like Julius Caesar, that of course also being the governor. The influenza outbreak we see in Season 4 of the show supposedly represents the Black Plague of 1346, with Terminus meant to depict the Middle Ages. The theory then states that Alexandria represents the aristocracy of the 17th century. I hope I'm saying that right, but it basically means royals, with the rich and powerful living in luxury whilst everyone else suffered and lived in poverty, aka the apocalyptic landscape outside of the walls of Alexandria, with the Saviour War then representing the World Wars of the 1900s, and finally the Whisperer War representing the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. Now this theory, although maybe a slight stretch, is very well crafted and gives a pretty good argument to why this might in fact be true. Unfortunately, the showrunners have never addressed this rumour, so ultimately we will never know, but it's a pretty cool theory that's garnered quite the reputation on Reddit. Now, have you ever wondered why in The Walking Dead, walkers that moan and groan bumbling around often are able to sneak up on our survivors totally unnoticed? Well, this theory suggests that maybe our group are all essentially deaf. Yes, you did hear that right. right. It raises the fact that due to the constant use of firearms without any form of ear protection, that the majority of our characters are basically just deaf, and that explains why walkers are often able to sneak up on our group. I mean, if you actually think about it, let's take Rick Grimes for example. He fired a gun in the tank in episode 1 that we know caused him temporary hearing loss. Then the explosion of the CDC, shooting Shane at point blank range, the escape from Terminus, and all the other countless times that Rick's fired a gun without any ear protection makes me think that maybe this theory has just a little bit of merit to it. Because in real life, firing a gun frequently without ear protection can cause something called shooter's ear, which is essentially just hearing loss. And our characters do that a hell of a lot. And the show even acknowledges how a deaf person could survive in the apocalypse with the character of Connie. Now, it was created by Reddit user Talha1808 over 4 years ago and does seem to make a lot of sense. But what do you guys think? Are our group all just deaf like this Reddit user suggests, or do the writers just want to create some tension by having the walkers sneak up on people out of nowhere? We first meet Enid in Season 5 episode 12 titled Remember, and very quickly it's clear she is far more competent as a survivor than most of the other Alexandrians. We also learn she was the only survivor of her group and turned up at the gates of Alexandria all by herself. Now we are talking about 2015 here, a time where the Walking Dead viewership was at an all-time high and fan theories ran rampant amongst the community. And this one would suggest that Enid was actually a spy for the Wolves, a hostile group who played the antagonist for a short while in the show. And long before we had Dante as a spy for the Whisperers, people believed Enid was the original spy, believing her to have gained the trust of Alexandria, learnt about their blind spots and weaknesses, and tipped off the Wolves to attack. And during Season 5, this theory built up a fair bit of momentum. So, what evidence was there to actually support this claim? Well, in a conversation with Carl during the Wolves' attack on Alexandria, she says the lines,
"There are too many blind spots. That's how we were able to..."
They got in the walls.
The use of the word "we" heavily implied that Enid was actually a part of the Wolves, and her lack of emotion during the siege would only add fuel to the fire. People also speculated that Enid tipped the Wolves off about Rick and the others clearing the quarry, giving them a perfect time to strike. Again, looking back, we know how wrong this theory turned out to be, but at the time, this was an extremely plausible theory, and we even saw the writers use community spies later down the line, possibly even inspired by this very fan theory. It will forever go down as one of the most innovative and creative fan theories with plausible evidence to even back it up. Ultimately, it never did come true, but this theory was huge back in the day. Okay, this next one might actually be the most insane theory on the entire Iceberg, and it's so mental that people who believe in this theory call themselves Team Delusional. So, I was first made aware of this theory a couple of months ago when I covered other fan theories on the channel. After that video, I got a message from a subscriber who asked not to be named, but I will put the screenshots up on screen now for you to see, essentially telling me there's a group of people who still believe Beth's alive. So we all know how it unfolded in the show. In Season 5, Rick and the group try to make a peaceful exchange with Dawn, but it goes horribly wrong. Beth stabs Dawn, and then she is subsequently shot in the head, which kills her. But after my recent video on fan theories, I got this interesting message, and I checked out the YouTube videos he mentions in the DM, and the theory goes something like this. Now, I'm basically going to summarise it because it is extremely long, but they believe Beth is still alive and is going to make a return to the series at some point in time. Now, you may be wondering to yourself, what evidence do they actually have? Well, firstly, they argue when Beth falls over a mannequin in Season 4, Episode 12, the mannequin's arm is the exact same as Beth's when she supposedly dies in the episode Coda. They also claim that Beth's arm resembles Snow White's arm from the 1937 film, who is also assumed to be dead, but she comes back to life. So right around now, you're probably thinking, well, Beth got shot in the head, so how did she survive? And they address this in their theory by claiming that a large part of the scene was cut out of the show, arguing that when Beth stabs Dawn, Dawn's gun is still in her holster. However, the next cutaway, it's magically in her hands. They insist that the writers have left large parts out of this scene to confuse us as the viewers, and say due to the bullet's impact at the top of the forehead, it could have missed her brain and meant she survived the gunshot. A large part of the theory also pointed out that before her death, the number 8 was popping up in a lot of her scenes, which supposedly symbolised she would return in 8 years. However, the theory has since changed from that, as she obviously didn't appear in 2022, which would have marked the 8-year anniversary of her death. Now Team Delusional have their sights set on a return in Daryl Dixon's Season 3, which is currently airing on our screens now. And if you ask me, personally, I think this theory is absolutely bonkers. But you do have to respect the dedication from Team Delusional. I mean, if you type in Beth's Alive theory on YouTube, you will find multiple hour-long videos giving you reasons as to why she might be alive. Now, there are varying degrees to this theory. Some people initially thought Beth would receive a somewhat remix of Carl's moment in the comics, which hadn't yet happened in the show, aka getting shot in the head and surviving it, as many people thought Beth's character arc was so incomplete that she couldn't possibly die in the way she did. However, many of these fans lost hope after she didn't reappear in the latter half of Season 5, and what you have left are the most extreme variants of the Beth's Alive theory. Okay, with that being said, that wraps up Layer 2, so now it's time to once again delve one step further into the depths of Layer 3 of our iceberg. Now, we all know Frank Darabont's Season 1 of The Walking Dead was slightly different from the rest of the show. In this season, we saw more capable walkers and possibly the existence of supernatural powers. Now, this comes from the theory that Jim was a prophet or a psychic and had a vision about the walker attack on the Atlanta camp in Season 1, Episode 4, titled Vatos. So, what's the evidence for this? Well, Jim randomly seems to snap and starts digging graves, but coincidentally that night there is an attack on the camp with 3 people being bitten and then dying. And how many graves did Jim dig? That's right, he dug 3. Theories speculate that Jim had a vision of this walker attack that night and knew to dig these exact amount of graves because he saw into the future. Now, to make the timeline a little bit clearer, Jim dug these graves on day 60 into the apocalypse, meaning the camp had been absolutely fine up until that point. But all of a sudden, on day 60, Jim gets an urge to just dig these graves, and that very night the camp was attacked by a horde of walkers. I mean, it seems like a massive coincidence, especially down to the fact that Jim knew the exact amount of people that would die. Now, some people go one step further and theorise that Jim even faked his bite in order to escape the group and go alone, although there is literally no evidence of that. But the theory of Jim being some kind of prophet who can see into the future is an extremely interesting one. Now, this weird coincidence is never really addressed in the actual show, but it is either just that, a very weird coincidence, or did maybe Frank Darabont want to explore the idea of supernatural powers, very subtly, because the scene of Jim digging the graves doesn't feel normal and is a bit out of place in the show, and then it happens to turn out that he dug a grave for the exact amount of people killed in the attack on the camp. It's all very strange. Now, this next theory is one of my absolute favourites, so I thought I'd let my good friend Ty take this one away.
Alright folks, huge thanks to Theo for once again having me on the channel. Now, the Morse code theory specifically stems from Season 7, Episode 4 of the main show, and is probably one of my favorite fan theories to come from the franchise, as it's one I totally bought into myself. You see, during the episode's service, when Negan and the Saviors visited Alexandria for their first offering, we see the imprisoned Daryl paraded around by Negan like a dog as a power flex and threat to our survivors. However, during one point in the interaction where Rick and Daryl stood facing each other from a distance, we were shown a shot of Daryl repeatedly blinking his eyes at Rick that distinctly looked like an attempt to communicate Morse code, which some fans interpreted as the word East, indicating Daryl was attempting to convey where the Savior's base was located, with fuel only being added to the fire once fans discovered the presence of a Morse code chart inside one of the Alexandrian homes within the exact same episode. For those who noticed this connection, it was a gratifying catch that most thought would be followed up on and confirmed throughout the season, but obviously that never happened, as Jesus and Carl were the ones to locate the sanctuary. Turns out, through a couple of frustratingly vague interviews with CBR, this wasn't Scott's intention. Well, technically, he says, I think the theory could be correct, just not in this story. Whatever the hell that means, and goes on to sarcastically say he would love to live in a world where the two intimately knew Morse code and knew how to communicate it with each other. Obviously implying this wasn't the intention, while mentioning how it was a really sunny filming day. So, there you have it. Norman had the sun in his eyes in the same episode they showed off a coincidental prop. Not exactly the most exciting conclusion to the theory, but one that was realistic enough to believe in at the time. Once again, huge thanks to Theo for having me on.
In my opinion, this is one of the greatest Walking Dead theories ever made, and I can't believe how well thought out and coincidental it really is. Now, I would just like to say a huge thank you to Ty Swell for coming on the channel, and you should definitely go and check him out after you finish this Iceberg video. A link to his channel will be left at the top of the description. Now, the wildfire virus is thought to have originated in La Biomedicine Centre, a research facility in France, and for years fans speculated that the wildfire virus that turned people into flesh-eating monsters was actually man-made, and this was all but confirmed in a post-credit scene in the spin-off World Beyond, as we see an unknown individual shoot a scientist in France for, quote, starting this thing, referring to the virus itself. And after seeing this post-credit scene, many theories started to circulate around the reasons someone would create this virus, and the leading two are population control and super soldiers. Firstly, pretty self-explanatory, it's thought that the French government tried to make a virus in order to cull and control a portion of the population. However, the virus escaped the lab, infected everyone, and the consequences were catastrophic. But the other theory is that France was actually trying to create a form of super soldier, basically attempting to take away any form of pain or basic needs from a soldier, such as food and water, saving them money and meaning their soldiers would become 10 times more efficient, giving the country a secret weapon and making their military almost unbeatable. But this super soldier serum that they were experimenting on ended up backfiring and turned people into flesh-eating monsters known as walkers. And to add insult into injury, this airborne virus escaped the lab it was created in, quickly becoming a global pandemic, bringing an end to civilization as we knew it. Now, this is probably the most humorous fan theory on the list, and it states that gingers are immune to the wildfire virus. Now, the Reddit post says this: throughout the 28 seasons of television that exist within the world of The Walking Dead, not once in the main show or any spin-off have we ever seen a ginger walker. With roughly 2% of the world's population being ginger, you would have thought we'd seen some form of ginger walker across the tens of thousands of zombies seen throughout the Walking Dead universe. Not a single one of them has ginger hair. Now, obviously, there is the character of Abraham Ford, who you are seeing clips of right now, and he is, stating the obvious, ginger, but he gets his head bashed in with Lucille, meaning he wouldn't reanimate because his brain was damaged. This theory states that gingers, due to their slightly different DNA makeup, were able to combat the wildfire virus, essentially becoming immune, as if they were bitten, they just wouldn't reanimate. They would die, but they wouldn't become walkers. Now, this theory is absolutely hilarious. However, after doing some research, it's just not true. Whilst yes, there is a distinct lack of ginger walkers out there, there is one who appears in season 6. After digging far and wide, I managed to find one. That, of course, being Paula. Now, Paula is the ginger saviour who abducts Carol and Maggie after our group invade the outpost, and after Carol kills her, she does reanimate, ultimately disproving this theory that gingers are immune. But the scene of her reanimating is less than 2 seconds long, so you can't really blame the person who made this for missing it. However, this is the sole ginger walker seen across the Walking Dead universe, so at least that's an interesting fact. Fear the Walking Dead Season 1 aired on August 24th, 2015, and it gave us a look into how another city in America dealt with the wildfire outbreak, that of course being Los Angeles, and we followed the story through the eyes of the Clark family. We quickly learn LA fared just as well as Atlanta did, aka crumbling into obliteration. Anyway, the group flees the city at the end of season 1, and we end up in Mexico, where we learn Nick, one of the main characters, has a fascination with the dead. He demonstrates an understanding of how they function long before anyone else in the universe, and thanks to his understanding of the dead, he figures out he can cover himself in walker blood and mask his scent, walking amongst the herds undetected. Now, Nick Clark is a fascinating character, but around the time of season 3 of Fear, fans started to speculate that the Clark family seen in Fear might go on to become the Whisperers in the main show, as this was a whole year before they'd make their debut in season 9. Comic book fans eagerly awaited the adaptation to hit the screens, and the theory suggests that throughout the Dave Erickson era of Fear the Walking Dead, which was season 1 to 3 if you didn't know, the show was slowly building up Madison Clark to be a villain. So people thought she would go on to become Alpha, and Fear the Walking Dead would serve as her kind of backstory. Nick's knowledge of the Whisperers would give her the concept of walking with the dead, and people thought that this would be a great way to merge the two shows into one, whilst also giving pivotal roles to the characters of Fear the Walking Dead in the main show. And although this of course would never happen, it was an interesting theory. Though I am so happy that the writers didn't do this, as Nick and Alicia are some of my favourite characters in the Walking Dead franchise, and demoting them to time skip villains into season 9 of the main show would have just ruined Fear the Walking Dead for me. But to be fair, they ruined it anyway post season 3. But that's the theory, that Fear the Walking Dead was a backstory for how the Whisperers came to be. But with that being said, that is every Walking Dead fan theory I could find. Now, this video took a ton of research, so I would really appreciate it if you did enjoy the video to please like and subscribe. If I've missed any fan theory off this iceberg, please do let me know down below in the comments, and again, a massive thank you to Ty for coming on the channel. His link can be found down below in the description. I had a ton of fun looking into all of these fan theories, no matter how crazy some of them might be, and I want to thank you all for the recent support my channel's been receiving. We are closing in on 30,000 subscribers, which is just insane. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.